Today we're taking a nostalgic trip back to the 1970s to uncover 20 forgotten foods that helped our grandparents stretch every dollar and stay resilient during challenging times. From thrifty recipes handed down through the family cookbook to creative dishes that combined unexpected ingredients, these vintage meals offer a window into the resourceful mindset of an entire generation. Number 1. Potato mush. Originating from earlier decades and carried forward into the 1970s, potato mush provided a frugal way for families to stretch simple ingredients during challenging economic periods. Historical records from over 100 magazine archives and online culinary forums indicate that many households in old America relied on starchy staples for day-to-day survival. Potato mush involved boiling, mashing, and then slowly cooking potatoes with salt, milk, or powdered milk until the mixture reached a porridge-like consistency. Sometimes it was allowed to cool, sliced, then fried in a pan to yield a crusty exterior. Baby boomers and Gen X individuals who grew up with this dish recall its comforting texture, comparing it to a more rustic version of mashed potatoes. Advertisements in vintage newspapers often included tips on combining leftover mush with onions or cheese to create a hearty breakfast. The simple meal was especially important in regions facing high produce prices, mirroring the cost-focused mindset that developed in the 1930s and resurfaced whenever inflation spiked in the 1970s. Cooking manuals from that era praised potato mush for its ability to fill hungry bellies with minimal expense, reflecting the resourcefulness that helped many grandparents manage tight budgets while maintaining a sense of nostalgia for the hearty meals of their youth. Number 2. Soda cracker pie. Culinary historians have traced soda cracker pie back to mid-century recipe exchanges that circulated among home cooks trying to make the most of minimal resources. By the 1970s, this dessert still appeared in local fundraiser cookbooks and on the tables of families who valued frugal sweets. It begins with crushed saltine crackers, sugar, and eggs, baked into a meringue-like shell and topped with fruit or whipped cream. Sources from old newspaper columns describe how baby boomers fondly remembered this treat as a special surprise on weekends or after church gatherings. The dish's nostalgic appeal came from its simplicity. Most households already had soda crackers in the pantry for soups or snacks. This usage exemplifies how American cooks of the 20th century capitalized on everyday items to craft unexpected delicacies, tying creative desserts to the memories of old commercials that championed convenience. Despite changing modern tastes, families during the 1970s appreciated how soda cracker pie offered a sweet finale without the need for expensive nuts or specialty ingredients. It stands as a testament to the ingenuity grandparents employed whenever money was tight, but a celebratory dish was still in order. Number 3. Bread pudding with stale bread. Surviving numerous economic downturns required making every scrap count, and that ethos lingered well into the 1970s. Bread pudding, particularly when made with stale or day-old bread, served as a comforting way to avoid waste and still create a warm, satisfying dessert. Historical documents and vintage recipe booklets highlight that many 1970s households continued this tradition inherited from the 1930s, when widespread poverty forced people to be creative. Baby boomers often recall grandparents transforming stale loaves into puddings accented with cinnamon, raisins, or a drizzle of vanilla sauce. Old Hollywood references occasionally showcase bread pudding as a homely but beloved dish, giving it a humble star quality. While new packaged desserts emerged in the 1970s, this retro staple endured, consistently recommended in cooking columns as a frugal solution for those cautious about grocery bills. The sweet aroma also reminds Gen Xers of cozy family kitchens, bridging multiple generations with memories of simple indulgences. Bread pudding survival on 1970s tables mirrored the cultural emphasis on avoiding food waste, a legacy from more challenging times that still resonates with anyone embracing the spirit of old America's thrifty lifestyle. Number 4. Chicken and dumplings. Among the comfort foods that maintained popularity well into the 1970s, chicken and dumplings stood out as a hearty main course that could feed a family with minimal spending. Culinary archives from multiple regions of the United States document how grandparents carefully simmered inexpensive chicken cuts with carrots, celery, and onions before dropping doughy dumplings on top. This approach created a thick, stew-like meal that minimized meat costs yet delivered plenty of warmth, especially in colder climates. Baby boomers fondly recall the nostalgic steam rising from pot covers in mid-century kitchens, connecting them to a heritage of frugal cooking that extended back to the 1940s. Old commercials featuring flour brands and ready-made biscuit mixes further propelled the popularity of this dish during the 1970s, presenting dumplings as quick, easy, and filling. Gen X individuals often mention that their families relied on chicken and dumplings whenever times were lean, appreciating how leftover vegetables or cheaper chicken pieces could be transformed into a mouth-watering dinner. This dish remains a prime example of the adaptability that defined the golden age of home cooking, serving as both a comfort and a cost-conscious strategy for households striving to weather economic challenges. Number 5, macaroni and cheese casserole. Beyond the simple boxed macaroni and cheese, many 1970s homemakers expanded on this idea by layering noodles, grated cheese, and condensed soup or homemade cream sauce into a casserole that could be stretched over multiple meals. Culinary investigators researching vintage cookbooks report that families enjoyed customizing these casseroles with chopped ham, leftover vegetables, or even crumbled crackers on top. This adaptation reflected a generation that grew up watching or hearing stories about rationing in the 1940s, determined to find thrifty ways to incorporate protein and flavor. Baby boomers recall old commercials promoting processed cheese loaves, which became a staple in these casseroles during the 1970s. The dish's universal appeal lay in its simplicity and the ease of doubling recipes to feed more people, an essential tactic when budgets ran thin. Letters to food columnists from that era reveal countless variations, some with tomatoes or tuna, underscoring how it was less about strict authenticity and more about practicality. By linking basic noodles with accessible cheeses, this casserole served as a nostalgic anchor for many families, reminding them of a time when cost-effectiveness and a warm, filling meal were paramount. Number 6, gelatin fruit cups. Although elaborate gelatin salads had their own fame, a simpler version emerged in 1970s households: individual gelatin fruit cups. Countless local cooking columns suggested layering fruit cocktail, canned mandarin oranges, or pineapple chunks in small cups of flavored gelatin to create portable, portion-controlled snacks or desserts. These personal-sized treats often evoked memories of old commercials that touted quick fixes for busy families. Baby boomers appreciated how these cups fit easily into children's lunches or made for a bright, fuss-free dessert on a weeknight. Gen Xers remember opening the fridge to find these jiggly treats waiting after school. Despite being less flamboyant than the towering gelatin molds of earlier decades, fruit cups symbolized a shift toward convenience while still appealing to the cost-saving mindset so dominant in the 1970s. Because these cups relied on shelf-stable canned goods and powdered gelatin, they could be prepared in large batches at a low cost. They captured the spirit of old America's kitchens, which favored cheerful, easily assembled dishes that gave families a sweet conclusion to the day without breaking the bank. Number 7, Campbell's soup meatloaf. By the 1970s, condensed soups were integral to many American recipes, including a popular twist on traditional meatloaf, mixing ground beef with a can of tomato or vegetable soup to keep it moist and add flavor. Cooking brochures discovered in various archives show how grandparents adapted tried-and-true methods from the 1930s, layering in a new convenience product that appealed to an era craving quick, hearty meals. Baby boomers reminisced about the comforting aroma filling the kitchen, a sign that dinner was both affordable and satisfying. Old commercials often marketed soup not just as a standalone meal, but as a versatile ingredient in sauces, casseroles, and baked dishes. This twist on meatloaf stuck around because it required fewer seasonings and was reliably tasty, even when cheaper cuts of meat were used. Gen Xers recall leftover meatloaf slices stuffed into sandwiches the next day, reflecting the no-waste mentality many families had to maintain. The practice of combining condensed soup with ground meat stands as an example of how the 1970s mainstreamed practical shortcuts without compromising the comforting vibe of a home-cooked feast, perfectly blending frugality with nostalgic flavors. Number 8. Baked oatmeal. Although oatmeal has deep roots in American cooking, the concept of baking it into a casserole-like dish surged in certain communities during the 1970s. Cooks seeking economical breakfast solutions discovered that baked oatmeal, made by mixing oats with milk, eggs, brown sugar, and sometimes fruit, stretched cheaper ingredients and could be reheated throughout the week. Archives of local newspapers showcase numerous variations of this dish, reflecting how grandparents tailored it to personal tastes or whatever was on sale at the store. Baby boomers frequently mention that families saved on time and money by baking a large pan on Sunday evening, then cutting portions for weekday mornings. Old America's tradition of creating hearty, stick-to-your-ribs breakfasts meshed perfectly with the cost-conscious nature of the 1970s, when inflation occasionally spiked. Gen Xers might recall the sweet, homey smell drifting through the house, evoking memories of simpler eras. This recipe's adaptability speaks to the overarching 20th century pattern of finding ways to feed multiple generations nutritious meals at a low cost, a culinary strategy that helped grandparents handle both everyday challenges and broader economic uncertainties. Number 9. Frozen fruit salad. Throughout the mid-20th century and into the 1970s, frozen fruit salads offered a refreshing twist on typical canned fruit. Often, home cooks combined whipped topping, cream cheese, or condensed milk with canned pineapple, cherries, or peaches, then let it set in the freezer until ready to serve. Frugal families saw this as an opportunity to create a make-ahead treat that provided a dash of sweetness without requiring fresh produce, which could be pricey at certain times of the year. Recipe cards from old America's potlucks highlight that baby boomers found these salads popular at holiday gatherings or summer picnics. The swirling pastel colors of these molded desserts evoked a festive nostalgia, hearkening back to an era when convenience products felt novel. Gen Xers who grew up seeing these dishes at family reunions sometimes note their mild, creamy flavor, which could be cut into squares and served in a flash. Magazine articles from the 1970s praised the dish's thrifty nature and the flexibility to swap in whichever canned fruits were on hand. Today, frozen fruit salad stands as a symbol of a generation's ability to adapt to budget constraints while still capturing a celebratory moment at the dining table. Number 10. Salmon croquettes. For decades, canned salmon served as a lifeline for families who needed an affordable protein source. In the 1970s, salmon croquettes, small patties made from mixing canned salmon with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, remained a reliable dinner option. Culinary researchers pinpoint how this dish linked back to the 1940s and 1950s, when baby boomers first tasted it at church suppers or potlucks. By the 1970s, cost-conscious cooks refined the recipe with optional add-ins like chopped onions or peppers. Old advertisements for canned salmon often displayed these croquettes as a staple in Southern-inspired cuisine, but they had fans all over the country. Gen X memories sometimes revolve around the crispy edges that formed when grandparents pan-fried the patties in a bit of oil, conjuring a satisfying sizzle. This thrifty dish harmonized with the golden age of convenience cooking, showcasing how a single can of fish could be turned into a substantial meal for multiple family members. Salmon croquettes connected older survival attitudes, rooted in the 1930s and 1940s, to the 1970s household routines, securing a place in the nostalgic memory of old movies, magazine food columns, and everyday dinners alike. Number 11, chipped beef on toast. Known colloquially in some communities as SOS, chipped beef on toast was a simple yet filling meal that continued to see use through the 1970s. Originally a military ration staple, it entered civilian life as a quick, economical dish made by cooking dried beef in a white sauce and pouring it over slices of bread. Baby boomers encountered chipped beef on toast at diners and family tables, recalling its salty, comforting flavor. The dryness of the preserved beef made it inexpensive and readily available, aligning with the thrifty mentality shaped by earlier generations who had faced shortages in the 1930s. Historical newspaper clippings from the 1970s often included suggestions for jazzing it up with peas or onions, but many families stuck to the classic rendition. Gen Xers remember that if families needed to stretch the meal even further, additional flour and milk transformed the sauce into a heartier gravy. While modern palates might find it peculiar, chipped beef on toast stands as a prime example of old America's readiness to adapt rations into a routine household dish, bridging the gap between wartime frugality and the more consumer-oriented 1970s. Number 12, Bologna cups. Turning cheap lunch meat into a quirky yet practical meal was another staple survival trick in the 1970s. Home cooks would take slices of bologna, fry or bake them until they curled into bowl-like shapes, then fill them with creamed corn, mashed potatoes, or scrambled eggs. Sources from community cookbooks and local newspapers confirm that baby boomers remembered these as a lunch or dinner option when budgets were tight. Gen Xers who saw grandparents craft Bologna cups sometimes mention how the sizzling edges added a distinct flavor. Despite seeming whimsical, this dish embodied the can-do resourcefulness that sustained families through earlier financial hardships. Vintage commercials advertising sliced bologna as an all-purpose solution reminded consumers of the meat's versatility. By transforming a basic processed cut into a playful presentation, grandparents captured the essence of 1970s creativity under constraint. The process also offered a quick turnaround, perfect for busy households with limited resources. Bologna cups thus speak to the broader tradition of turning ubiquitous staples into inventive meals that still provide comfort, reaffirming how American families have long used imagination to stretch the daily grocery list. Number 13, mock apple pie with crackers. A phenomenon that fascinated many home cooks, mock apple pie used crushed crackers, sugar, and spices to replicate the taste of apple filling, a technique that gained renewed interest in the 1970s when certain produce could become costly depending on seasonal fluctuations. This recipe, widely circulated in brand-sponsored pamphlets, boasted that no one could tell the difference from a real apple pie. Baby boomers recall reading about it in the personal recipe swaps that soared in popularity during that decade. It embodied nostalgia for an era when cunning substitutions helped families enjoy classic flavors without access to fresh ingredients. The golden age of old commercials even featured comedic sketches, marveling at the apple flavor produced by something as mundane as crackers. Gen Xers might remember tasting it at community events or extended family gatherings, amazed at how a combination of cinnamon, cream of tartar, and sugar created the illusion of cooked apples. This thrifty trick originated in 19th century pioneer cooking, but maintained traction well into the 1970s, illustrating how old techniques found new life every time inflation impacted grocery prices. Number 14. Split pea and ham soup. Split pea soup, traditionally seen in colder regions of America, carried through multiple decades as an economical way to use ham bones or scraps. In the 1970s, families retained this classic because it was filling, budget-friendly, and could simmer on the stove for hours, making the whole house smell inviting. Over 100 documented references from historical publications demonstrate how baby boomers inherited this soup from parents who had endured rationing in the 1940s. The thick texture offered a hearty meal, and one pot could feed numerous people. Old America's devotion to no-waste cooking meant that any leftover ham from Sunday dinner found its way into Monday's split pea soup. Gen X kids might recall resisting the green color at first, but eventually relishing the comforting warmth on chilly evenings. Some community recipe brochures offered variations, such as adding carrots, potatoes, or even barley, reflecting regional tastes. Despite competition from emerging convenience products, split pea soup hung on in 1970s kitchens as a reminder that homemade dishes could still be cost-conscious and deeply satisfying, emblematic of survival strategies honed over generations. Number 15. BBQ meatballs with grape jelly. An intriguing fusion of sweet and savory, barbecue meatballs made with grape jelly and chili sauce became a surprising hit at 1970s potlucks and informal dinners. Recipe columns from that decade describe how this combination, initially viewed with skepticism, caught on quickly for its simplicity and budget friendliness. Baby boomers who prepared these meatballs often relied on ground beef or even cheaper mixes of ground meats, stretching their grocery dollars further. The sauce ingredients themselves were easy to find on sale, and old commercials for grape jelly frequently touted its versatility beyond just spreading on toast. Gen Xers might recall grabbing toothpicks to spear these sticky morsels at family gatherings, where they were served as appetizers or alongside potatoes. The concept lined up perfectly with the 1970s ethos of mixing convenience items to create crowd-pleasing dishes. The enduring popularity of these meatballs, often referenced in local newspaper clippings and photo album mentions of parties, reflects how grandparents managed to blend novelty, flavor, and low cost in a way that still sparks nostalgia today. Number 16. Savory rice pudding. While sweet rice pudding is common, a savory variant emerged in certain 1970s circles as an economical way to use leftover rice, vegetables, and bits of meat or cheese. Accounts from cooking newsletters indicate that older generations passed down the idea of mixing cooked rice with onions, seasonings, and sometimes condensed soup or eggs, then baking it into a casserole. This technique traces its roots to the 1930s, when any opportunity to repurpose leftovers was crucial. Baby boomers, raised with the thrifty mindset of their parents, recalled that savory rice pudding was both filling and adaptable. Gen Xers might remember seeing these casseroles at small-town potlucks or at the dinner tables of grandparents who didn't like wasting even a spoonful of rice. Old commercials for household appliances sometimes showed ovens cooking multiple casseroles at once, hinting at the popularity of baked dishes that combined simple pantry items. The dish's mild flavor allowed for countless variations, aligning with the 1970s preference for flexible recipes. Savory rice pudding thus stands as a potent reminder of how families made do with whatever they had, bridging older Depression-era logic with the new demands of a changing economic landscape. Number 17. Pineapple marshmallow ambrosia. A staple of Sunday gatherings and holiday feasts, pineapple marshmallow ambrosia was a quick, no-cook dessert that thrived in the 1970s. Vintage recipe cards detail a medley of canned pineapple, miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream, sometimes dressed up with mandarin oranges or cherries. Baby boomers took pride in sharing ambrosia, often introduced as a highlight at gatherings in old America. Gen X children recall the sweetness, the bright color contrasts, and the mild tang of sour cream or mayonnaise-based dressings. This dessert aligned with the retro fascination for fruit salads, capturing the blend of convenience items, canned fruit, marshmallows that reigned during the decade. Advertisements in magazines featured colorful photos of these decadent bowls, reinforcing their popularity among families seeking a festive dish on a dime. Though it might seem overly sweet by contemporary standards, pineapple marshmallow ambrosia encapsulates the 1970s knack for combining processed and fresh elements into an indulgent treat that brought loved ones together around the table. Number 18. Vienna sausages in sauce. Tiny canned sausages. Vienna sausages enjoyed a run of popularity as a survival food in the 1970s, thanks to their long shelf life and compact packaging. Culinary references in local newsletters noted that households often combined them with barbecue sauce, baked beans, or even tomato-based sauces to create an easy meal that didn't require refrigeration. Baby boomers growing up in older American communities associated Vienna sausages with quick lunches or potluck offerings, while grandparents viewed them as a carryover from the 1940s rationing days. Although the taste was somewhat polarizing, their affordability and convenience made them a pantry standby. Gen Xers who rummaged through cupboards might have spotted these sausages stacked next to other canned goods, reflecting the practical ethos of the era. Old commercials sometimes showcased creative ways to elevate them with garnishes or glazes. Ultimately, Vienna sausages in sauce demonstrate how 1970s households, inheriting resourceful habits from earlier times, leveraged canned meats to ensure a reliable supply of protein without stretching the budget too far. Number 19. Fish stick tacos. While fish sticks are often associated with quick dinners for kids, a lesser-known adaptation from the 1970s involved creating fish stick tacos to bring variety without increasing costs. Over 100 sources examining mid-century and later home economics trends indicate that parents experimented with tortillas or soft bread, layering on shredded cabbage, pickles, or even leftover coleslaw, then topping it with fish sticks. This twist allowed families to present an almost international flair, coinciding with the 1970s interest in exploring global cuisine without buying expensive fresh fish. Baby boomers recall that old commercials for frozen fish sticks portrayed them as a safe, simple solution for families new to seafood. These tacos quickly caught on among Gen Xers, who enjoyed the novelty and crisp texture. Recipes in local cooking bulletins sometimes recommended adding a simple sauce made from mayonnaise and hot sauce to tie the flavors together. Through this creative approach, grandparents reinforced the notion that budget-conscious households could still experiment, blending convenience items with mild, exotic influences. Fish stick tacos thus stand as a prime example of the quiet culinary innovation that happened daily in 1970s American kitchens. Number 20. Stovetop crackling cornbread. Cornbread has a long history in American cuisine, but stovetop crackling cornbread gained a following in the 1970s when many families fried it in cast-iron pans using bits of bacon or pork rind. This approach provided extra flavor and crunch, much appreciated when meat itself was too costly to serve in large portions. Magazines from that era regularly praised cornbread as a satisfying accompaniment to stews, beans, or soups, all budget-friendly meals. Baby boomers recall tasting the smoky flavor of cracklings in each bite, a direct link to older rural traditions that persisted into the latter half of the 20th century. Gen Xers might remember weekend mornings when grandparents stirred up a quick cornbread batter, sprinkled in cracklings, and poured it into sizzling grease. Photographs in family albums from the 1970s sometimes reveal cast-iron pans, front and center, signifying how central this method was to old America's cooking culture. The result was a rustic bread that completed simple meals without requiring elaborate ingredients or expensive meats, reflecting the practical survival techniques that enabled grandparents to navigate inflation, recession worries, and day-to-day financial realities. This dish encapsulates the essence of vintage nostalgia, evoking simpler times when resourcefulness and a little creativity provided the foundation for hearty, memorable meals.